Hi, it's Steph here from the Bead shop in Nottingham. I'm going to show you today how to make one of our popular tiaras from the Tiaras book. It's the flower garden and it's one of the most popular designs that we teach in our workshop, and it's always been quite a well admired piece that's on display in the shop. So we've previously made many of these. This is a gold plated one using Swarovski crystals in sort of an autumn colour tones. Really effective and surprisingly simple. I think a lot of people feel that tiaras can be very complicated and fiddly to do, but once you've got the few very basic techniques down, it is very, very simple. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. I've picked out some lovely spring colours here. These are the Preciosa crystals in the bicone shape. Really effective and great for all sorts of designs. I've got light amethyst here, pink sapphire, chrysolite and Vitrail light for a little bit of sparkle there. So I'm mostly going to be using 0.4 silver plated wire, 0.4 millimetres that is great for fine work. It's delicate enough that it doesn't look clumsy when you're threading the beads on. It's perfectly fine for the size of hole in the beads as well, but then when you wrap it together and twist it, you're creating 0.8 wire essentially, which is then really good for holding its shape. So I'm gonna just cut off a sensible length of wire to work with. That's about 1/2 metre, 50 centimetres, and then I'm going to work from the centre of this piece. So we're going to be creating little pieces, like little sprigs and flowers and essentially the leafy foliage bits in little clusters. So rather than trying to fill your band from one side all the way around, you can do it in small clusters and then you can actually sort of design it as you go as well. So you might want to create the pieces for the centre first, but I tend to create a few little sprigs and then you can decide whether actually that second one that I did was much better than the first one, and therefore you might want to put the second one you created centre front to show it off in all its glory. And then you can start building either side, and you might find that the front ones you want a little bit taller, then working down to the sides you might want them a little bit smaller. You might find you want them quite tall all the way around, but sometimes designs evolve as you start creating them. So I always find just getting started and building up some of the pieces that are going to create the finished design is a much easier way to do it. And sometimes you might have set out with an idea of a really full band, but as soon as you've got a few pieces on the front, that's it, and you're happy with it. So sometimes less is more, but it's fun creating the pieces anyway. So I'm going to start with one of the little flowers, which is created with 5 little beads in one go. So I'm just going to scoop up 5 of the light amethyst to begin with. So I'm working with all 4 millimetre here, just makes life a little bit easier. You can mix and match sizes if you want to. So there's 5 on there, and I'm just going to slide those down to the middle of my wire. And then you can see when the wires are crossed over, that naturally creates a nice little circle of beads. So hold on to your beads and then cross your wire over. So now all I'm going to do is hold on to my beads, and then there's a couple of different ways to do this, so I'm going to show you a few different ways so that you can work out what works best for you. So I'm crossing over the beads there, and you can see that I formed almost a right angle between the 2 wires, and I'm holding them equal distance from sort of an imaginary horizon there. I'm going to hold on to my beads with my right hand, and then with my left hand I'm just going to keep hold of the wire and keep that nice right angle there and just twist the 2 wires together. So you can see there, it's going nice and evenly wrapped around one another. If your beads are a little loose, you can manipulate the wire and also do an extra little half twist or twist at the top to get them to be a bit closer together. So that is the very first step. Very, very simple to do. It's really all about a bit of patience and holding on to everything really here. So the next thing I'm going to do is just a little single bead off to one side. So I'm bending one side of the wire up. Approximately where I want my bead to sit. I'm just going to make a little bend with my nail there. So I'm going to slide on my next bead. So I'm going for the pink sapphire. And that is now just sat where that little bend is. And now I can fold the wire down the other side of the bead. So it's nice and neat either side there. And then this is a slightly different way. So rather than now that these beads are on the wire and slightly in the way, it's a bit harder to twist because you might damage this one in the process. So what I'm going to do now is hold on to the wire in my left hand where the two pieces meet down here. And then I'm actually going to twist the bead. So nice and firm. And you can see those two wires wrapping around one another. Now this is the crucial bit. You don't want to get carried away and keep twisting because what happens here, this little bit just below the bead becomes a weak point, and if you keep going, it will just eventually just snap off. You'll get used to how far you can push the wire before it breaks on you. It's something that comes with experience really, but also you can kind of start to see where the wires there, go and focus, the coils start to get really close together and a bit dense. That isn't a good sign. So you want to just be wary of that and just stop before you think you can go any further. So you'll inevitably end up with a little bit of a gap between the beads and the wire, and that's absolutely fine. So now I could add beads on the other side. So on here, I might go for a little cluster of 3 of the green beads. So I've made a little bend again as we did before, scooping up 3 beads. Slide those down. And what you can do is actually manipulate the wire so that the beads sit where you want. So if I want these to be really nice and snug and create a little triangle next to one another, I can actually help that by pushing the beads into place like that. So I've got a little triangle there, and then we're going to do the same again. So hold the wire down there, and then we're going to actually twist the beads. Now if you find you're struggling with strength in your hands, you can easily use chain nose pliers or nylon nose pliers. I've got chain nose pliers to hand, so I'm going to use those, but you do have to be careful that you don't squash the wire where the two pieces are overlapping, because if you squash like that, you can actually dent both pieces of wire and create a weak point, whereas if you're gripping over the top flat, you'll do very little damage. So I'm going to hold the 2 pieces of wire here. Now I find I do a lot of my holding and gripping with my left hand. I am right-handed, but I sometimes find I've got quite a bit of strength in my left hand, so I do a lot of the fiddlier bits with my right hand and holding with my left. So doesn't want to behave. There we go. Oops. Grip it further down. So now I'm going to twist my beads. Again, stopping before it gets too tight at the top. And then you can always do an extra little twist at the bottom to cover the bit where you were holding with the wire, holding with the pliers. There we go. So you can start to see how quickly little sprigs will all build up. So now I might want to carry on. There's quite a bit of wire here, but I might not want to make this little sprig any bigger. So what you can do, and you can see these are kind of made up in little clusters and gathers, is leave a bit of space in your wire and then start building a little bit further along. So that will give you some wire between the little clusters to actually wrap around your band. So I might start here and then just treat this as we have been doing. So I might start with just a single white amethyst bead this time. Got one little bead on there. Hold and twist. Try out different ways of holding and twisting. You'll find something that feels comfortable for you. You might also find that even though you're right-handed, you might find it easier to do the holding with your right hand and twisting with your left. It's entirely down to personal preference and what you feel comfortable doing. There's no wrong or right way, really. So I've got another little bead on there, so I'm going to do another little cluster. And maybe use pink this time. So just go 3 on there. So that one you can see is ended up a bit longer. So rather than keep on going, I'm just leaving that, and I could make this bit meet in the middle instead. So I haven't made them too long. And then I might just add a little bit of green on there as well. And there we go. It's building up quite quickly. So as I was saying before, you can build up several of these little clusters and then start assembling them onto your band or hair comb or whatever you'd like to use. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'll show you how to start adding items to the band. And there's also another little trick you can use. So I'm going to attach them this way. Now, I tend to refer to these bits of wire as legs. So you want to sit your little clusters of beads on top of the band with a leg behind and a leg in front. And there's a very good reason for that. And that is when we attach the beads to the band, we don't want them to be flopping forwards or backwards. So having a leg either side and attaching them securely by wrapping one leg one way and the other leg in the opposite way, they won't flop. So I'm actually putting quite a bit of pressure on there, and I'm just going to wrap around twice that way and twice on the other way. So this has obviously got the other beads in place too. So it might be determined by where the beads end up. There we go, so that fits quite nicely on top there. So then this shorter leg I would put behind, because that's come from the front there, and then I can secure that by wrapping just twice round. And you'll be surprised just how firmly they're attached with only those couple of wraps of wire. So here, that's not going anywhere. The beads are sitting there quite happily and neither flopping forwards or backwards. So now I can continue. That short piece is probably not ideal to do any more wrapping with, but I tend to finish off off all my ends when I've got all my beads in place. So I can carry on with this longer piece. So you can create other clusters and then add them all on at the end, or you can sort of create a few, wrap and then carry on and keep adding sort of in situ on the band. So I'm going to just do a couple more wraps along the band just to get a bit further away from these clusters. So now here I could add another little cluster. So here I'm going to go a little bit taller, so I'm going to start up here. I'm going to go for 3 little pink ones again. Fold those down, and now we've just got to hang on to the wire and the band at the same time, but the process is exactly the same. So I'm just going to hold the 2 wires together and then twist my beads. Again, being careful not to go too far up. There we go. So that's looking nice and even. And then again, now we can secure that in place by wrapping twice around the front here. I'm going to show you another little trick that you can do where you create little branches where you've got beads sticking out but higher up. These are all sort of individual little twists, but you can actually do separated ones. So I'm going to add 2 little green beads here. So I'm going to thread 1 on to begin with, fold the wire either side, and rather than holding right back at the base and the band here, I'm just going to hold it a little bit further up and just create a couple of little wraps, twists there. So that's just 2 or 3 twists, and then fold the excess wire upwards, and we're going to repeat that up here as well, so about the same sort of distance away. So make a little bend, thread on your next green bead. Oops. Fold the wire down again, and this time you're going to grip where the little wire crosses over with the first green bit. So twist that there. And then you eventually twist these 2 shorter bits at the base together. So holding the wire with the base of the band and then wrap. So you've essentially created little raised bits. So it's a good way of creating a denser volume of beads without having lots of individual stalks. So you could do that with multiple beads on there. But it's a nice, straightforward way of creating an interesting looking band, but it's all just one technique. So you can just keep on going. So I'm going to secure that in place by wrapping a couple of times around. Now that piece of wire is a little bit short really, so I'm not going to try and fit any more on there, but I will show you how to start a new piece of wire and finish off another. So ideally we don't want any sharp bits of wire sticking in, catching in hair and things like that. So what I tend to do is, if I know I'm not going to be covering the band afterwards, because that's always an option, you could leave the band simply like that, just with the small pieces of wire wrapped around, which aren't going to be noticed really once it's sat so close to the head. You can also, if you want to, cover the band, even glue like a thin strip of ribbon or fabric on there. That sometimes works well. Or afterwards just wire on a line of beads that covers all the wire work, which again, if you want to add more colour or combine the beads in the floral design into the band. That's a nice way to do it. But if you're not doing either of those and you just want to tidy the wire up on the back, if you make a little bend in the wire on the back so that it's going to be hidden on the back. So it's already wrapped around a couple of times, that's secure enough that it's not going to come undone. But what you can do on the back here, just made a little bend so that this piece will be hidden on the back, and then we can actually, when we join the new piece of wire on, wire over the top of this. So I'm just going to trim that off. Not too close so there's enough wire to get caught under. There we go. And then I'm going to cut myself a new piece of wire. Now it's not worth trying to create the whole design with one piece of wire. You'd drive yourself absolutely mad, I think. So just cutting sensible lengths at a time and working with that until it's finished, and then picking a new piece is ideal, particularly if this is your first tiara. You don't want to be fighting with the wire. So now I'm going to join this in, and I'm just going to tuck the wire under a previous wrap if it will go. Sometimes it won't, particularly if your wraps have been quite snug. So it doesn't matter, because I'm going to do a little bend in this, and we're basically going to do the same as we've done with the piece we're starting. So I've just created a little bend and left a tiny tail that I can then hold with the other piece and start wrapping over. Sometimes holding the wire is the trickiest bit. So I can start holding that firmly and just wrapping tightly. So there we go. So that has secured the two pieces. If you need to tweak anything, you can do. Just going to push that in there. And now you can start carrying on and adding more beads. So as you keep adding items, you want to be careful of creating not too many tall bits and not enough short bits. You want to continue with a bit of variety in your heights of beads. So it's something just to keep stepping back, having a little look at how it's building up and seeing how that is forming for you, which bits you're happier with, which bits you don't like quite so much, and just keep tweaking your design and adding beads as you go. You'll find if you've ended up with a bit with, say, a big gap, which you didn't anticipate or hadn't realised until you've got a bit further along, it isn't the end of the world, because you can always add bits in afterwards. You can always, as you say, you're going to wrap the band in beads after you've added to your twisted pieces, you could just add a little extra twist and a bead as you're wrapping as well. So there's no, oh, it's disastrous and you can't possibly correct it. There's always things that can be done if you're not quite happy, and you can always tweak things. So it's just a case of just keep on going and enjoy it. You can always, if you want to, go back to making a few little pieces and wire them on and then add to the sides, which is what I'm going to do to continue on this side a bit more. So once you're happy with your design, I've not gone for a full round the head. I've just gone for focusing on the centre front part. I've just worked by eye, and that looks fairly symmetrical. There's an even amount of beading from the centre outwards. What I have been left with is the little pieces of wire at the very end. So all I'm going to do is just fold those very neatly to the back and then give them a little firm squeeze against the band at the back so they don't stick out. And that's not sharp at all. And then I'm also going to show you what you can do. You can leave this exactly as it is, but if you're not happy with the look of the wire, there's a really nice way of covering the band, which I'm going to show you next, which will also cover these little ends of wire too. I'm just going to squash that again. For the final little bits of wire that you can't wire over, you could always add just a tiny little bit of epoxy resin glue, which sets hard like resin, and therefore it won't snag or catch in anything. So that's the basic band, sort of stage one, which you could end there and it'd look great in a hair do, or works really well. And we've had a few people who've made these sorts of things for little flower girls as well, which are really sweet, and then they can kind of do them in colours that match the bouquet and their dresses, which has been really nice to see. To cover the band, I'm going to use the really super sparkly Vitrail Zillions, because they're just going to tie everything together, because they've got lovely sort of pinky, violety touches to the beads, and then the silver will just be super sparkly. So for the actual wrapping bit, it is a good idea, if you can, to use a really long bit if you can. I'm not saying metres and metres, but where we're just using, say, half a metre before, about 1.5 metres would be good. And one little trick that I will share with you now as well. Often reels of wire come with the ends wrapped round on the coil, sort of on both sides. Never undo both ends. You become in a big old tangled mess of a nest of wire. And it might seem a little bit fiddly and long-winded to pull the strands out like this, but the alternative of it all springing out is not good. Learn from my mistakes rather than experience them yourself. So we've now got a nice long piece of wire, and we're going to attach it in a very similar way to how we were finishing off the wire before. So I'm going to start my beads a little bit to one side of the actual wrapping here. So I'm going to just fold it back on myself. So I'm going to hold the piece of wire with the end pointing towards the rest of my beads, and then start wrapping around the band towards the beads. And then once you've established that it's secured, that's looking neat, you can start picking up beads. So it is a case of just picking up one bead at a time, slide that down to the band, and then hold the bead in place. So I tend to just grip it either side of the band, and then just wrap once around the band, then come back to the front to then pick up a new bead. Now you can have your beads sat as close together or as far apart as you like. That is just mainly determined by your positioning. So you'll get into a bit of a rhythm with it, but you'll find that they sit quite nicely just with a little bit of a gap between. And then once the whole way around the band and then back to the front. And then pick up another one. And you're just going to repeat that all the way around the band, and it will start to just cover all of that wire underneath, and then add a new little bit of sparkle to the band. Obviously, this bit's optional, but sometimes it just adds an extra bit of something. So here you can see I've met the stood up twists here. So just going to make sure that I'm then coming up, when I come around the back, I'm going between the beads and I'm not trying to squash them or get them, flatten them between things. So I'm going once around the band and then coming back up the front. So just working around those decorative bits. And then you just keep going. So as you can see, I've got almost all the way around, so I've covered over all of the wire work, and then just trying to mirror how many beads there are at the beginning as there are at the end. So there's 3 on that side, so I'm going to add just one more to the pair here. And then, because we're going to end up with a loose bit of wire, there is a little bit of a trick here. I'm going to wrap that around a couple of times to secure, and then on this last time I come round, I'm actually going to tuck the end of the wire into the bead here, and then feed that all the way through. And then on the back here, you kind of just guide it in. Now we already know the wire is secure at this side, so now that is literally just hiding the sharp bit inside the bead. So I'm just going to trim that off right next to the bead there, and then that's hidden, nice and secure, and there's no sharp bits on the back at all. That's all smooth because every single end has been wired over the top of, and it was just that last little one that's now tucked away, hidden inside that final bead. So there we go. We have one more spring-like headband there, and you can tell just just by using a different metal, so this is obviously gold plated and more autumnal coloured beads to the spring one, just how different the looks are you can create with exactly the same techniques. So it's really quite effective. So it's very, very easy to adapt to whatever fabrics you're trying to match to, or themes or anything. I mean, that would just look so sweet for a little girls' party as well. So, well, I hope you've enjoyed this and picked up a few tricks and tips along the way. If you do make a tiara, please feel free to share it with us using the hashtag #TheBeadShopNottingham. We love seeing what everyone creates. And yeah, feel free to pop any questions below and we will answer those for you as well. Thank you.